Hello travellers, I'm Jo Frances Penn and today I'm here with Becky Doughty. Hi Becky.
Hi Joe, how are you?
I'm good, it's great to have you on the show. Just a little introduction. Becky writes heartfelt and wholesome contemporary commercial fiction and Christian fiction, including The Autumn Lake and the Tuscan Romance series. So we have lots to talk about today, but just as a starter, how did travel play a part in your childhood?
Well, I always say I'm a missionary kid in recovery because I think travel made me kind of fearless. Being a kid that traveled all around the world and never really had a place that was home base, even though we didn't live in a lot of different countries, we did primarily live in Indonesia. My dad was an airplane mechanic and pilot, and he oversaw most of the hangar operations at our base camp in Sentani, which is part of Papua New Guinea, which is now West Papua. I always forget that. So for me, travel was just a way of life. We traveled back and forth to the States, which was home. And then I traveled to school. I was a boarding student in high school, and we did that all on our own. So no parents traveling with us. 2 days of travel, having to get to the right place mid-stop. So yeah, travel was just a part of life, and I think it kind of made me this fearless, I'm just going to do whatever I want to do kind of person. But the flip side of that is that it also leaves you feeling a little bit, not unrooted, but wondering where to put your roots down. Especially since we were always told where home was. You know, America was home. In particular, where the grandparents lived was home. But it never felt like home because we were always only visiting. And so, yeah, that's a big part of, I think, why I write stories about people finding their place. I've always written stories. I've always escaped into other people's lives for that reason. So I think that's kind of a convoluted answer.
No, it's actually a great answer, and it's fascinating that you were told where home is whilst living elsewhere, because it's like, well, but we're living here, and like West Papua or PNG as it was, very different culture, climate, religions. I worked in mining for a while, so that sort of Wild West idea of what was going on in PNG, and then of course there were wars and everything, and
Yes.
so that's kind of different. And then to be said like your home, like you belong in America, which it must have been very strange. What age were you? Like what formative years were this?
My parents went to the mission field with 3 kids under 3. So I know, crazy, right? What were they thinking? I can't even imagine. But so I was one, my sister, well, back it up a little bit. My older brother and I, not blood related, not biologically related, but the 2 of us are adopted. And then the next 2 siblings were not supposed to happen, but they came along, naturally. And so my sister and I are only 8 months apart. So when they went to the mission field, my brother was almost 3 or right around 3, and I was 1, and my sister was younger. So
Until what age were you living
until
away?
my senior year of high school. Yeah.
Right.
So we came back periodically. At the beginning, it was like every 4 years. And then it became, as they realized how isolating that became for some people, I think now furloughs are closer to every 2 years. That was.
And of course, no internet, no, like international phoning was really hard.
Yeah.
I mean, very different world, right? It wasn't like you go to West Papua now and it's completely different.
Completely different. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we had to travel. We would phone home. The grandparents, once a year, we would travel into the capital, Jayapura, and make a call at the embassy. And it had to be very short. And so our mode of communication was cassette tapes. We would record cassette tapes and send them. And it could take sometimes 4, 6 weeks, 2 months before they would arrive at one destination or another. But so our grandparents would record these long cassette tapes with Grandpa reading stories and singing songs. And here's a song I think reminds me of Becky. And so we had these wonderful treasures because communication was so difficult. But one of the things...
Do you still have them?
I don't. I don't. My mom has a few things from back then, but those are some of those memories that we just lost. One of the issues that we had was a lot of times we had to pack up and leave everything behind. And so you get used to taking with you whatever you can put in your suitcase. And with the idea that we're going home to see the grandparents, a lot of stuff that we should have kept didn't get kept. But my mom has kept all of her prayer letters and has compiled them in a book. And so that's cool because we get to see the journey through those letters. But yeah.
But the tapes, and I imagine those people are dead now, and your grandparents. And it's so funny, isn't it? Because at the time you take this, because I was at school for a bit in Malawi in Central Africa, and it was also that we would get packages, and there would be, I was telling a friend the other day, we used to get Matchmakers, terrible chocolate, really awful chocolate, but when the box of Matchmakers arrived, it was like the best thing.
I know. Hubba Bubba bubble gum and these awful it was like, ooh, somebody got a package because somebody's chewing American gum, and a lot of the times it was just awful things. But we always had, when we would send crates, often when we came back to Indonesia, we would pack a crate and have it shipped via ship. Often by the time those arrived, they would have holes cut in the side and stuff gone from them, taken from them. So even when we sent stuff ahead or sent stuff to arrive on time or once we were there, a lot of times things were missing. So we never knew quite what we'd get at the other end of the journey. We started shipping things in 55-gallon drums that you could seal, that they were harder to break into, but you cut the lock on one of those things, and so it was always kind of a free-for-all. You never knew what was going to meet you at the other end.
Far cry from Amazon next day delivery.
Right.
That's kind of crazy. But I do want to come back on, you've mentioned you were adopted, and on your website, I was reading this, you say on your website, I am adopted. It's pretty cool. I come from nowhere, anywhere and everywhere. And this fascinated me because I don't think I've ever read a description of being adopted in terms of sense of place before. So that really caught my eye as to why you chose those words. Like, why describe it that way?
I think it's a really good question. I've had to really think about this and how to answer it succinctly. I think for me, one of the things I struggled with growing up was a sense of belonging. And it's not because my parents were problematic. They were wonderful parents. I mean, I am a success story as far as winning the lottery with parents through adoption. But I still always felt like there's something of me out there somewhere. And if I could find my people and my place, I would know where I came from. And then that would give me a better sense of where I'm going. And so I think because I have such a deep connection to the people in my life, my family, my adopted family, my husband and children, I'm married 37 years and we've got grown kids and 5 grandkids. And so a very stable people aspect. But because of the travel and because of the never really having that sense of place, I always thought, wouldn't it be cool to find out that I'm from some random place and get there and find a bunch of people who look just like me and act just like me, because I'm a little bit weird. I don't fit in with my other family, especially my younger brother and sister. I have a third sister, 5th child, who is also adopted, and she's Haitian. But according to my birth records, I have both Japanese and Spanish in me, which, I mean, you'd never know, right? But wouldn't it be cool to go to Japan and find this is where I started from? So I think a sense of place is almost more important to me because I already have a sense of people. Ironically, here's a funny little twist in my story. We've been living in California for most of our marriage, but we moved to Indiana, which is right in the middle of the Midwest. And we ended up living on the exact same street, just 4 houses up from where my husband grew up. So talk about a sense of place being home, for Kevin, coming back here to his street has been like coming home. And so there's a little bit of me that gets to live vicariously through him regarding where home is. But I think I'll always search for where home is. And I am a believer, and that is actually one of the few things that has kept me grounded, so to speak. I had a very... the reason I came back my high school year, or my senior year of high school, was because I got kicked out of school. I really struggled with authority, and especially not being able to question authority. It was a very conservative boarding school because it was for missionary kids, and back then there was not a lot of, this is the wrong word, but policing the way that the schools were policed. So if you questioned anything, you were the troublemaker. And so that really played a lot into, why am I here? I don't fit here. I have apparently different beliefs than, I'm told that this is how Christians act and behave, but that's not the way I believe. And so that really kind of set me as an adult in this direction of searching, I think. Walked away from my faith for a long time in my 30s, and then at the end of all of that journey, I realized that's the only thing I really can depend on, because people are just... people are people. So
they absolutely are.
This goes back to that idea of place. And I think the older I get, the more I feel like, maybe I'll just keep traveling while I'm here and wait for that feeling of home for heaven. So
yeah, well, that's really interesting, because you do hear, I'm not a person of faith. I'm a person of respect for faith and really fascinated with it. But I have heard many people say, I will go home to Father God or Jesus. And so, yeah, that I think that's really interesting and actually great to have some kind of comfort. But let's stick on the different places, because one of you've got one there, I think, your Tuscan Romance, All the Way to Heaven. There it is, All the Way to Heaven, a Tuscan Romance, and everyone says, ooh, Tuscany.
Yes.
Excellent.
Tuscany.
So tell us about that particular trip and how that inspired the book, because obviously sense of place is important to you. So yeah, tell us about that, and what are the places that still stick in your mind about that time?
Well, this was kind of a whirlwind trip. A friend of mine and I had always had go to Tuscany on our little bucket list, and it's because we were massive fans of Under the Tuscan Sun. And ironically, it was the movie that we loved so much. I always read books first, except this was one that I didn't read first because I didn't know there was a book that it was based on until after watching the movie. So this friend and I had watched the movie, fallen in love with it, and realized we both wanted to go to Tuscany. And my husband, bless his heart, he hates planes. He hates flying. And I'm just the opposite. I grew up on these little tiny puddle jumpers. That's what my dad always called them. Little tiny planes and helicopters. And I just never even thought of flying as being something to be afraid of. And so it ended up that talking to him, I'm like, Nancy and I want to go to Italy, and we ended up going. And with his blessing, he stayed with the kids and did the dad thing. And so we wanted to go to a few places that were not completely off the beaten track, but that were a little less chaotic, especially since we were going at the end of summer. It was October. Into fall, but still during the harvest season and the touristy season. So we actually started our little trip in Lucca, which is a medieval walled city. And so there were lots of tourist amenities there. It wasn't like it really was in the middle of nowhere, but it was perfect for our introduction to Tuscany because it felt like what you see in the movies without being just super touristy. So one of the coolest things about Lucca was the walls that circled the city all the way around have a walking and bike trail on top of them. So you could rent a bike for the day and you could go all the way around the city and pull off and get some gelato, or pull off and stop at the little merchant market, or pop into the square. Or so it was just this fully immersive self-guided tour of this wonderful little town. So I think the reason Lucca really stands out to me is because it was our first. It was the first B&B that we stayed at in Italy. It was the first real gelato. It was the first climbing at one of the old medieval towers and the garden at the top, and a lot of firsts that happened there. The first night, or the first morning we were there, we woke up to the sounds of this woman singing Puccini under our window. And this actually was the birthplace of Giacomo Puccini. And so it just felt like straight out of a movie or straight out of a book. All the feels. So anyway, then we went to Siena, and we were a couple months late for the Palio, the horse races, the crazy horse races. But what we discovered was that those competitions, there are these little neighborhood competitions, they go year-round sometimes. So at one point, we heard this group of people coming up this street singing at the tops of their lungs. And this was like at 10 or 11 at night. And from our little fifth-floor balcony, stairs only. So we went running down to see, let's see what this is. And we just joined up the back of this group and walked with them down to the Piazza del Campo, the big piazza there. And there was another group coming on the other end, and they were like launching taunts at each other, and just this great, good-natured competition. And we got to just sit there and experience it and have celebratory drinks with everyone. And it was so, I don't know, it just felt like we were part of this much bigger picture. And we purposely tried to find ways to plug in, even though we knew we were tourists. So that was really neat. And then our goal was to go Tuscany down to the Amalfi Coast and then back up to Rome to go home. So we headed down to Sorrento. That was our first stop. Ate on the beach and then kind of settled in there. And then the next day we went up to Naples, to Napoli, and saw the museum and the secret room and all of those fun things. And so we ended up going back to Sorrento, took a day trip out to Capri, which was just beautiful. The next day we were supposed to go to Positano and Amalfi, but I got a call from home that my dad had had a stroke. And so it was just like, at first it was supposed to be, I actually got to speak to him, and he said, "Don't come home. I'm going to be okay. It's going to be good." And it was such a terrible thing because I was so poor, and the idea of having to rebook a plane and figure all of that out was so overwhelming. But I already was in that mode. I mean, it had changed everything, And so when he had a second stroke, it's like, we got to go home now. We headed back to Rome the next morning and were able to get a plane that afternoon that took us to Paris. We overnighted in Paris in the airport because we had like a 6-7 hour layover. And I got a call in Paris asking if it would be okay with me if they took him off all life support because he was gone otherwise. And I think because of my belief in heaven, I was comforted by the fact that I will see him again. I didn't need him to wait for me. He was gone already, but needless to say, I got home, Italy got shelved, everything that happened there, and it was full on into preparing for how to process grief and taking care of mom and gathering family members and funeral. And it was just pretty brutal. And so, like I said, everything kind of just got put on hold.
I think it's really fascinating because some people never go anywhere because they are afraid of something happening while they are gone. So that's one side of the equation. And then on the other side is what you went through there is something, the bad thing or one of the bad things did happen while you were away and you dealt with it. But now whenever you think back to that trip, that is the overwhelming thing about it. So what I'm interested in is, well, one, how did you write a romance about an area that's kind of sort of resonates with that grief? And I guess any thoughts for people who worry about going away and going on a trip and are often just can't because of fear of things happening to them while they're away or their loved ones or whatever.
Okay, so ironically, my friend is quite a bit older than I am, and her father was in ill health, and we had talked about what would happen if we got the call about her dad, ironically. And she had said, I said my goodbyes to him, we won't come home. Never imagining, my father was only 67, never imagining that it would be my dad. And he was this working man and a mechanic. So when I came home, everything got put away. And I rarely even spoke about Italy to anyone until, this is where it's kind of cool, 7 years later, almost to the day, 2 days shy of the 7th anniversary of Dad's death, I was woken up hearing Georgiana singing outside my window. And I lay there for a minute thinking, wait, where am I? I could hear her voice, just like, even after I woke up, just echoing. And I thought, okay, maybe this is Dad saying, let's go revisit this place that had these wonderful memories for you that turned sour because of me. And of course, I projected all of that into it, but that was how it felt to me. And so I pulled stuff out and I started going through it, and grieving was just so hard for me to see the good in it while also remembering how every little moment felt once I learned what had happened with Dad. And so I finally just said, I need to look through this stuff and pull out these memories as though they're somebody else's. Give myself that distance. And so I kind of just created this character who was completely different than I am, completely a different person, who went to all these places and sort of told me about them. And in the process, it wasn't like I had to do this. It was just my creative mind putting this together, and it was like, okay, now it's going to be her story, and let's write this story. And so it was a very natural progression. It wasn't even like, oh, I'm going to now do this to conquer this, or I'm going to now write this so that I can relieve myself of this guilt or this, because there's a lot of guilt when you're away. And I should have come home when I got the first call. I should have. I come from a physical therapy background, and so I know about strokes, and I know that people survive them all the time, and I know that people don't, and I know that a second stroke is very common. And so there's always that regret. But I think regret is one of the worst things that we can do in life, to live with regret. It keeps us trapped where we are rather than moving forward. So bringing this book to life was a way to honor the trip, honor the memory, but it's also a way to honor my dad. At the back of the book, I actually have an author's note that kind of tells this very brief story of not being able to really relive those memories until so much later. Sometimes we do have to just let time pass, and then we can deal with it. But other times, I think we have to face it for me, I'm a bit of a warrior type of person. So I want to face the demons. I want to face the hard things. But I think that even if we face them, we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace and a little bit of space in between us and the hard things, where we can withdraw if we need to, or we can put somebody else's face out there instead of ours. And so the book was not at all about somebody losing a father. It's a romance, and it's about this girl who goes, having found out that this guy she was dating was already married, and so she was planning to surprise him with this trip, and she ended up going by herself. And to me, that's also another element of facing your demons, is facing them alone. I've read your pilgrimage book, and I love that you went by yourself, because I think we miss out on so much when we always have to have someone with us, when we always have to have somebody else being a buffer or a translator or I think it becomes a filter, and so we miss out.
Yeah, on that, I never get the audio guide. You know, this audio guide that all the museums, all the art galleries, and I'm like, I don't want you to tell me what I need to pay attention to or the important things I should look for. I want to be the one walking around, and I'll read the little text or whatever next to things if I'm drawn to it, but I want to be the one drawn to something first, and I will decide whether or not it's important to me. And yet I feel like sometimes people look at you like, why aren't you putting the guide on? Like, why don't you want us to tell you what's important? But like you said, having other people there to curate you, or but then that kind of comes back to that question, which was, what if people are afraid of going, whether it's alone or in a group, because of what might happen?
Death happens no matter where we are, right? The bad things happen no matter where we are. And I don't know, that's a really tough question to even answer, because I feel like if we're going to have regrets, I would rather have a regret that I missed being at the right place for a bad thing than a regret that I didn't experience these things that are good things, if that makes sense.
And not like 90, let's say 95%, I would say, of all the traveling I've done has had a positive net effect, as opposed to, obviously bad things have happened lots of times, but they have not taken away from the overall importance of the travel. Yeah,
absolutely. In the year 2000, I used to run. I don't anymore, but I used to run. I went through what I call my running years. It was the years that I walked away from my faith. It was the years that I just struggled with a lot of things. It was in my 30s, and I decided that I wanted to run one marathon in my life. I had run a lot of half marathons, but I really wanted to run at least one marathon. And if I was going to run a marathon, let's make it a good one. So I went and ran the Dublin Marathon in the year 2000. And while I was there, I don't know if you remember the year 2000, but they
because I went to Australia.
Okay. So monumental weather issues, flooding all over England and Scotland and Ireland. And I flew into London, and I went up through Leicester. And so I backpacked up there. She and I then drove up through Yorkshire Dales, stayed with friends of hers, and then went up into the Lake District. And I mean, we were at Derwentwater, and the lakes were just overflowing the docks. It was crazy. And so then we went up into Scotland, and I crossed over from Cairnryan to Northern Ireland and stayed in Belfast. Had I known anything about what was going on in in Belfast in the year 2000, oh my gosh, the youth hostel I stayed at, windows shot out, and they just boarded them up, and they said, we're not replacing them till this is over. We're tired of replacing these windows. So, waking up at 11 o'clock with gunshots outside, it was just crazy. And I'm thinking, I didn't even have the brains to think, wow, this is really stupid. I just thought, oh, okay, this is what's going on.
We should say it's not like that anymore. The troubles have passed.
No, it's wonderful. So then I went down to Dublin, ran the marathon. So leaving Scotland, I have been, back to by myself, backpacking, down to Dublin, youth hostels all the way, ran the marathon. But it was during the marathon, raining the whole time. My sister, who lived in Sweden at the time, had planned to come over and be there for the marathon, and she ended up having to have some kind of surgery. And so I ran this epic run by myself. It was, the starting and ending point was a mile away from the youth hostel. So I walked to that stop, that point at the beginning, crossed the finish line, walked back to the youth hostel, and cried for like an hour in the showers. Just this complete release of endorphins with no one to share it with. It was just one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. It was supposed to be this epic woohoo, and you cross a finish line that you've been planning for and preparing for like that, and there's nobody to celebrate that with. It was like having everything stripped away, and all that was left was me walking home back to this youth hostel where nobody knew me there either, and hiding in the bathroom just crying because the rooms in this hostel were jam-packed. It was a big one, and of course it was the only 24-hour or no curfew one that I'd been to in forever. I ended up leaving a day early and heading down to Wicklow and Glendalough and just hanging out there at St. Kevin's Monastery and the ruins there, and walking and processing away from everyone, all by myself. I literally was in there all by myself, in walking among the stones and the ruins and the gravestones. Then I had to go down to Rosslare to take the ferry back across to Wales, and the storms had kicked up again. And I got the last ferry across, got into Pembroke, made it to Swansea, and found that the train tracks had been flooded out. They were shutting everything down. And I had to be back at Heathrow the next day. And I just thought, I'm not going to make it. I just want to go home to my people, and I'm not going to make it. All of that's to say, it was utter chaos. But by the time I made it home, it really was, like I said, that stripping down of everything else, all of my plans, all of my expectations, everything that I thought would happen. It happened, but in a different version of what I thought it would be. I thought, I really just have no control. All I can control, if that's the right word, is the people I love. It's what's inside of me. What I give to the world, what I put out there. That's the only thing that I can control. So to me, that's what self-control is. It's not putting limitations on myself. It's me determining what I put out there. And so that kind of ties back into when we go on these trips, there's this, I can be afraid that something bad will happen, or I can embrace the moment that I'm in. I can embrace the people that I'm around. You just never know when you just go with whatever's going to happen and be in the moment and embrace where you are. You never know. You don't know what you're missing out on if you don't go.
Well, we are almost out of time, but this is the Books and Travel show. So what are a few books that you love and recommend?
Well, of course, Frances May's Under a Tuscan Sun. I think everybody should read that. It is actually a memoir, very different from the movie. And then we talked a little bit about grief, and one of the authors I really love is Becky Doughty. She's written several books on death, and Smoke Gets in Your Eyes is another take on death. And to me, understanding death and embracing death is actually a really good way to process grief. We also talked about the idea of home and what makes home home. And one of the things that my husband and I have always done is every home we've lived in, what has made it home is planting a garden. It's the first thing we do wherever we end up. And so in this home where we now live, 3 houses up from his, 5 houses up from his, we planted a garden very first thing. And I have kind of a morbid fascination with poisonous plants, but this is a beautiful book. It's called The Complete Language of Flowers. I mean, the art in it is just wonderful. So a lot of times my books are a little gardeny anyway. I'm a hobby herbalist, so I've got a lot of herbal books and home remedies, and so even my garden is also my medicine chest. And so yeah, and of course then my books.
Yes, absolutely. So where can people find you and your books online?
I am an author and an audiobook narrator, so you can find my books at beckydoughty.com. And I narrate most of my own books, but I also narrate many others. I've got about 200 plus audiobooks out there that I've narrated for other authors too. And so you can find me on Amazon and Audible and Apple, both the books and audiobooks. But just, yeah, look up my name, Becky Doughty, Doughty.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for your time, Becky. That was great.
Thank you, Joe.